Hi, Eliana here. I'm going to show you how to make another card using Misty. I'm going to be using the Allison Craft Starburst stamp set, and it looks either like a starburst or a sunburst, whichever you like. And I'm just picking up the stamp with the lid. I've placed it in the bottom left-hand corner so that it's wedged down down on the bottom. And now I'm placing a piece of Paper Tray Ink Stamper Select white cardstock, and I am using Stampin' Up! Crushed Curry. This is one of the older felt pads, and sometimes those felt pads can become a little concave. I do prefer the felt pads over the newer foam pads. In this instance, I am having a little trouble inking up my stamp, but I still prefer the felt over the foam. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to wipe up that gap in between the rays. I'm worried that it might make contact with the paper if I push the stamp in too much. I know that you don't get any ink on your paper when you press on the lid. If there's anything on the lid, it won't make it to the paper. But sometimes if you have it on the stamp itself and you push hard, it will make it to the paper. So I did wipe it up. And after I walk my fingers across the lid, I'm going to check to see if I got good coverage. And the beauty of this little tool here is that if you don't get a good image, you could re-ink and it will land at the same spot, and you could not have any halo or mistakes or anything like that. So I really like that. So I'm pushing down again. There's a little spot that I thought didn't get enough coverage, and I feel like I'm kind of pushing down a lot, and so I try to find a shim, and I'm going to use one of those foam pads that come in the Close to My Heart stamp sets. And if you don't have one of those, you could just use more cardstock or more graph paper or grid paper, whatever you want to call it. It's just, you're just trying to raise up the cardstock so that it makes good contact with the stamp. Now I've changed colors and I am stamping with Stampin' Up! Peach Parfait, and I'm not covering the whole stamp. I'm trying to make it look like a burst of color. And so I'm just taking a baby wipe and I'm blotting away the lines that the ink pad made. But I noticed that the baby wipe that I'm using is a little too juicy, and it's made my stamp a little wet. So I've found one that was semi-dry, and I used that to blot up the extra baby wipe moisture. If your stamp is wet, it could cause the ink to bleed, because these are dye inks, and so you want to try to use something that's a little bit drier than a fresh wipe. And now I'm going with my last color, and that is Dusty Durango, and I'm going to be blotting it up as well. As you can see, the edge of the stamp has left harsh lines, and so I'm just kind of blotting them, trying to blend them in. And the more colors you use, the more of a gradient you get. And these were the only colors that I had that made a good combination for me. And so that's what I'm working with. And once I see that, I am going to wipe up my stamp. And I've decided that I want to add another color in there just to try to blend the colors a little bit better. And I'm going to be using a Paper Tray Ink color, and I'm just using my stamp scrubber there to make sure that I got all that dark color off, and I've cleaned off my stamp. And I'm using Paper Tray Ink Harvest Gold, and I'm hoping that by using this lighter color, it will blend the colors a little better together. I don't want to go back and use one of the darker colors I had earlier, because then it would intensify that color on the cardstock and make it a little bit darker. So this card, you could make it into a masculine card, or you could, I think it'll be a card both masculine or feminine, whichever you like. I don't think it's too girly. And so I've inked it up and I'm looking at it and I'm checking my stamp, and I could see that there's just a little bit of ink left on the stamp itself, and so I'm trying just to press it into the paper there. And you could tell by just holding your stamp at an angle and have the light reflect on it, and you can see whether there's a little bit of ink left or not. And so I'm taking a closer look, and I'm noticing that there's a spot that I kind of want more color right there. It's kind of not blended well there, so I'm just going to ink up that little area there, and then I decide to ink up the ray just below it. And I like these little bitty ink pads. They're not itty bitty, but they're just the right size. And I'm pressing down again. And the part you didn't see here is that I cleaned off my stamp with a baby wipe, and then I also scrubbed it to make sure there wasn't any lint. And now I am using some Versamark ink to ink up my stamp. I want to use some sparkle embossing powder to just add some shine to it. And so I'm just making sure it's in the corner, and I'm pressing down. And because I want to make sure that I get plenty of embossing powder on there, I am going to ink it again with more Versamark. I probably didn't need to, but I just wanted to be sure that I had good coverage, and so I let my OCD take over and ink up again. And I just re-inked my ink pad too, just because I wanted to make sure I had plenty of Versamark in my ink pad. And now that I'm happy with that, I'm removing my background stamp, and I am replacing my foam insert so that I could use a clear stamp. And you don't need the magnets, but I like the magnets in there. It just keeps my work surface from shifting. And I'm wedging my cardstock back into the corner, and I'm using a stamp from Close to My Heart, and it is one of the stamp of the months from way back when. I'm not sure how long ago. It's called Illuminate. And there is a sentiment in that stamp set that says, let your light shine through. I could have picked, there's several that I could have picked in this stamp set, but this one, I just liked this one for this purpose. And I'm just lining it up on one of the rays, and I'm not going by whether I am straight on the grid on the lid, but I'm going on the ray that's on the card, and I'm inking it up in dark chocolate. And when I'm done inking it and getting my sentiment on the card, I'm going to clean off my stamp, and I'm going to use Versamark again. You could use a pigment ink, but for some reason I'm not very good with pigment inks, and so that's why I use a lot of Versamark. So I'm putting Versamark on my sentiment as well, so that when I cover the whole front of the card, it is also covered with my embossing powder. And I'm pulling out my sparkle embossing powder. I don't know what brand it is because it is old and I've had it forever. This stuff lasts a long time. So I'm just covering my card, and I'm not worried about the stray embossing powder, since it is a white cardstock, and I just want the whole front of the card to sparkle. I'm just going to leave any embossing powder that's in between the rays alone. If I were doing this on a darker cardstock, then I would take out my dry brush and wipe it away. So I am now using my heat tool, my heat gun, to melt the embossing powder. And you want to warm up your heat gun for a little bit before you emboss. The less time you have heat on your card, the less chances of warping. And so I've warmed mine up before I put it on the paper. You just didn't see that part. And once I have all of my embossing powder melted, I am going to flip my card over, and I'm just going to hit the back of my card with the heat gun. It'll help minimize some of the warping from the heat gun. And once that's done, with the magic of YouTube, my cardstock is trimmed down and it's matted on dark chocolate paper tray ink cardstock and placed on the front of a card. It is slightly smaller than a A2 card, but just because the starburst is smaller. But here's a close-up of my stamping. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and give my video a thumbs up. Which is a yellow. It's a darker yellow, and this is one of the older foam pads before they changed it, and I do like those better, but sometimes those foam pads they get a little concave, and so I'm having a little trouble making sure that I have good coverage on my stamp.